DAX Sportscars is a name synonymous with performance and innovation, but today we're shining the spotlight on two legends who took that legacy to new heights. Literally, meet Gary Sanders, renowned engineer, fabricator, former founder of XCS Designs, and Duncan Cowper, former DAX co-worker with Gary and a world-class racer. Together they worked to develop many DAX cars, including the Russian DAX Cobra replica. One car that they had worked on developing is the insanely powerful Turbo Hayabusa DAX Rush. This is the platform in which Duncan secured an incredible 9th place overall finish at the legendary Pikes Peak International Hill Climb. This is the story of friendship, engineering brilliance, and motorsport glory. Duncan's DAX Rush is no ordinary car. Under the bonnet is a turbocharged Hayabusa engine, originally designed for motorcycles, but now pushing this lightweight beast to its limits. Known as the race to the clouds, Pikes Peak has tested drivers for over a century. The course is a staggering 12.42 miles long, with 156 corners and a finish line sitting at 14,115 feet above sea level. For Duncan, it was the ultimate proving ground for his DAX Rush. High altitudes rob engines of power, and the turbocharged Hayabusa needed to deliver peak performance under grueling conditions. This is a bit of the backstory. Now let's go for a visit with Gary and Duncan in Gary's shed.
That was a lovely car.
But the fifth gear was so long geared, wasn't it? It was that was geared for 200 mile an hour, and he actually put a picture in the magazine of the 4,000 RPM, about 180 mile an hour coming down the straight. That Brunting thought that was. We actually went through one chicane really, really quick, which I wouldn't have attempted again because we only had about 2 inches of runway left on the exit. And this other chap there, he thought he took this pretty girl out in it and tried to do the same thing. And we just heard a big screech of tyres, black smoke, and here he ended up in the weeds with it. Come and shook her hand after. I don't know how he got through there that quick. But yeah, I wouldn't have attempted it again. But it was just things we did, when other sort of constructors were out there, you had to make yours look better than anybody else's. And then, as I say, with Gary again, I had 3 or 4 spurts at working at DAX or going to DAX. And it was one time when I was on my gardening leave, maybe. And Gary said, "Oh, you need to come down and go out in this." I said, "What you got?" He said, "Oh, this car is mad." And it was when they got the first Hayabusa turbo. And we had our little test track in Harlow. We used to go out past Gates's, round the roundabout, and there was a dual carriageway up the hill. This thing was sideways at probably 140 mile an hour, still going through the gears in 6 gears, spinning the tyres. And I don't even think we got to the next roundabout before I want one of these.
It was as a demonstrator. That was almost everybody that got in it with me when I used to take them out for demo rides. They would at some point come back. I would think I had a 90% hit rate. Yeah, taking people out, 90% of them would end up buying a Rush just because of that car. It was such an impressive bit of kit.
But it used to be the customers that come down and said, "I've got this, I'm used to really fast cars. I've got a Capri 3 litre with like 150 horsepower or a 2.8 Capri, or they've got these dragsters or something they thought was quick, and you take them out in the turbo booster, or even if you took them out, because at the time we had an aspirated couple of aspirated.
We did have a little ZZR 1100 car, this was such as much fun because it was so light, and I had a Fireblade one, which was actually I built it for myself, and that was the first bike engine one that was ever built. Rush.
Was that the yellow one?
Yeah.
And I did that sort of, somebody just give me an engine, and a really early 883 one. But even that, with that small engine, it was because it was a non-production car. I actually lowered it even more than normal, and then I made everything half the thickness, so it was much lighter. It was getting on 500 kilos, I think, in the end.
Wow.
And the acceleration, when you were one up, the acceleration and the braking as well on it, because it was one of the first early camber comp cars as well. Camber comp with a Didion beam, just like Dunk's car, really. And that was so much fun. I ended up selling it, and it went to Belgium in the end. I think it's still over there now. But and I did later on. I did for a bit of fun. I did find a Bell Jet Ranger turbine, and I thought, where should I put it in? And there was another Rush chassis sitting there, so it went in the Rush, and I got it running. But what do you do? Where can you drive it? You can't get it through IVA because of the noise and the emissions.
And but it was totally mad.
It was just a bit of more a bit of art in the end, and just took it to a couple of shows, and then in the end I pulled the engine out in the end and sold it to a Greek guy who put it in a speedboat, and
that makes sense.
Yeah. And I put a booster engine back in the car and sold that to a French guy who's still got it now, and he does track days with it.
I mean, if you think about the early days with the Hayabusa turbos, I mean, I was used to a 500 horsepower four-wheel drive Cosy 7, which, even now you'd get in that and it would still be fast. But I can't tell you the difference in a Hayabusa turbo in power and performance. It was like being in a spaceship. It was just the way it went through the gears was just ridiculous. And
it's the weight as well, though, isn't it? Because of the lack of weight with a bike engine, it's you can't. I don't think you can never match a car engine with it because all of a sudden you've got no weight. All of a sudden the cornering and the braking goes tenfold up as well. You'll never. I don't think you'll ever build a car engine. 7.
I mean,
have that same feel.
It was like my Cosy, wasn't it? It was just people used to laugh because I used to have 2 gearboxes for the four-wheel drive because I used to blow third gear out of it quite regular. So I'd come back and broken it again, and everybody would go, "Come on, out it comes!" Because all the bolts used to undo themselves almost. So, and the Cosworth, when you run it hard, even with the right bits in it, they are quite fragile when you get over sort of 500, 550 horsepower with them. And the boosters, some people say they're fragile, but when you think that engine was designed to pull 180 kilos of bike along with 170 odd horsepower, with a patch of probably an inch or so, for tyre, when we were running 10-inch slicks, so 20 inches of slicks in a 500 kilo car, and I think the most we see with my one when we did wind it up a bit was around sort of just under 500. I think it's 490 horsepower at the wheels, so it was just over 500 horsepower when it was at its most powerfulest. And you are going to break things, but the thing is the engine is so well. I mean, even with the problems you have with them, it still doesn't. I mean, I've probably broke every single part you can break in a Busa over the years, but still, it's such an incredible engine. And
it is,
and the weight and speed and the money you have to spend to get that performance. There's not another package out there, I don't believe, that rivals the Hayabusa engine at the moment. And then, as I say, going back with Gary and his mad ideas, we had this thing of maybe going to Pikes Peak, and we sort of got a couple of partners on board to help us and sponsors, and it wasn't getting out of hand, but the whole background of us going to Pikes Peak was with my little car that I'd built at home and sprinted, and it's little 7, not a big factory effort or anything. So I sort of, with COVID and everything, it all cut down a bit. And we had a little thing, and I said to Gary, "Would you be up for for helping us. If we can read these rules, which when you look at the rule book, it is quite intense for Pikes Peak. It's enough to put you off, really, and neither me or Gary are very good readers. But we can look at pictures and say, right, we can make that, and we Gary again sketched something out on a piece of paper, and we sent this to Pikes Peak, and they said, yeah, if you can do that, then. And then we got involved with Sean at MK and Neil, which I've known Sean since he was probably 4 or 5 again, because my best friend at school, was his older brother, and then he got into kit cars and that later on. And Sean at Neil at MK sort of went, above and beyond to help us, because mine's not an MK, but they've got a love of the kit cars. Some people have just got one brand and want to see people fail, maybe, but Sean Neil's attitude isn't like that. They're willing to help, and they'll work on any sort of kit car.
I even do work for them now as well.
Yeah, Gary does a lot of work for them.
Yep, lovely gas tanks.
Yeah, he does. He does all the mods on the stumps and the axles and diffs. And as I said, that they were more than kind enough to help us with. We got a cage, and then we had to make it to Pikes Peak. Yeah, he's a bit of a wizard. Is our young Gary. Yeah.
Understatement.
Yeah,
Amazing guy.
I wouldn't have been able to have done half the things I've done without his help. That's for definite. I still don't know whether I forgive him for hanging me upside down and jet washing me when I was about 17.
Well, I laughed anyway. But you were only 16 then, weren't you? I was about 28.
I
could get my own back, because he's standing right by an engine hoist, and I'm a bit bigger than him now.
I know that you went to a great deal of trouble to get the car organized, and then you shipped it over there, as my understanding. And I know you made 2 trips that I'm aware of.
Yeah.
How did you tell us about the results?
Well, I first went out 2018 with a chap called John Edwards from Alcon, who took me out for my birthday, because through another chap, I've always liked Pikes Peak. Rod Millen's always a bit of a hero of mine. Mm-hmm. The way he drives and everything else, he's flat out. And so for my 50th, I got invited out to Pikes Peak, and they were looking after the Volkswagen IDR, which took the record with Roman Dumas, which was the electric car. So that lowered the record. Nobody really thinks that's probably going to get beaten now, because the road with the ice and the heave is very bumpy now. I think when Loeb did it, they actually re-tarmacked the track overnight, Peugeot, to get, when Loeb, I think he did an 813, I think Loeb did in a petrol car, which is still the fastest petrol car up there. So it was amazing to be out there. So then a year or so later, I think it was 2018, I first went out. Then John said, do you fancy going to Pikes again? I said, yeah, I'd love to. And then he said, no, do you want to run at Pikes? It's not possible. Yeah, let's see whether a couple of club guys. So there was basically me and John, and then Jack from Whole Shop Racing came out with us. So there was 3 of us. But we went out and we went through all the regs and met with the organisers, and they're very helpful, and they're so nice. The help that we got out in America is unbelievable. To a point then when we started to build the car, got the car ready, had a few issues on lead times with a few bits. The car was supposed to fly or be boated over in, I think, the beginning of March. But we still were waiting for a few bits, so we missed that. Literally missed the boat, as I say. And then it turned out that because it was only 1,500 high, it would actually fit in the cargo hold of a passenger plane.
Oh wow!
So it actually flew out in a Virgin Atlantic passenger plane, which to the price of £11,000 that was to fly the car out, which took my little budget of my race budget out the window a little bit. But I was so far committed that we were just writing
That's
checks.
a lot of plaster.
Yeah, we there's so many people that helped us. We couldn't really. There was no choice of not going, so it was going to go no matter what happened. And then the car landed and then got shipped to Denver, and it was looked after by Rob Holland at 3R Racing for a few months. Then we went out and did the tyre test, which is about a month before Pikes Peak. And first run up the hill, we're doing driver's briefing at the top, which is Devil's Playground, which is about 13,000 feet. And as we're having driver's briefing, was sort of sliding about on the ice and the snow, and you think, oh, they're probably going to wait until this all defrosts before they get us underway, and turn round, the green light comes on the track, and that's it, line up and go. So we had a brand new set of sticker slicks, which we had no tyre warmers for them, and everybody was saying you should run your road tyres really, but the hill climb tyres we got are very soft, and I've only ever had slicks. I've never ever owned a set of wets, so I do know the car on the slicks. So we lined it up, and there's a bit of video somewhere with it trundling across the frozen car park to the start line, and the stickers are still on the tyres. And the first launch we did, we just sent it full send, and it survived, and I did. So, but the hardest thing, we were mapping the car from the UK, because the turbo speed has got a limit of 168,000 RPM, and because of the altitude, you've got no air to push against. The turbos can go supersonic, they can go just way over, and then the impellers come off them. And I think we reached 194 on one of them, on one of the runs, before we actually got control properly of the turbo speed, which was done by a chap called Sam Boardman. But we were actually Bluetoothing off my computer by mobile phone back to the UK and mapping the car, and then he was modifying the map for me live, and then we'd do another run. And the Americans and everybody thought this was balmy. They thought we were trying to make a phone signal, and when I said no, it's my mapper, and they looked on the computer and could see he was moving everything live and tuning the car, they thought that was quite cool. So, and there's a lot of people did some calculations, but the car literally started on the second start of the car, and it didn't miss a beat. So practice went all well. The car didn't, nothing wrong with it at all. Come to race week, we qualified, I think 12th for the, or it might have been slightly higher than that. I think it might have been 20th or something like that. But I think the first year we finished 12th, and we did a sub 10 minutes. We did a 9:57. But there's only been, I think, 6 or 7 rookies in 102 years that have ever broken 10 minutes. So it's a very small club. Sebastian Loeb being one of those as well. Wow. None of them were back plastering on the Wednesday after landing. We were proper, rookie. So it was that was quite good. And then I wasn't going to do it again because I thought we can't replicate what we did, and we left the car out. But then again, there was so much help from America, and we met up with a chap called Aaron Kaufman, which some people might know off Gas Monkey, who's a very good friend of a chap I was staying with, which is Bob Boileau. And again, the help you get is just mega. But what we wanted to do was this funny little car. Everybody talks about 1,000 horsepower and the rest of it. We actually detuned my car for Pikes. I think on the start line, we were running around about 340 horsepower at the wheels, and I think by the time we got to the top, we were around about the 280 to 290 horsepower. And it's more about learning the track. I spent months and months on the sim learning the track. So this year it was completely different. With the first run again at the top of the hill, we set off, car felt pretty good. There was a couple of little judders through the clutch pedal halfway through the run, and we thought, well, I don't know what sort of, going on. And then we got 3 corners from the end. There was a big bang. It don't sound good, and we actually broke the input shaft or output shaft in the gearbox. But the double gear held it together. But I looked down, the oil light was on, so we ran for nearly a minute without any oil in the motor. Got it to the top of the hill. Sat up there for about 2 hours while practice was completed. Came down on the record truck, got the car back down into Denver. And I think we started pulling the engine out around 12 o'clock in the afternoon. But what we had to do was we had a spare engine, but it wasn't the same spec. So we had to strip both motors down, swap which good bits we could rescue out of the race motor into the next motor. And that was with, Jack Frost as well. So me and Jack spent all night, and I think we fired it up about 12:05 in the morning and drove it onto the trailer. And then we had an hour's drive back to our apartment. So we got back to the apartment around 1 o'clock. And my alarm went off at 2:30 to get up for qualifying. So we might have had 3/4 of an hour in the bed, I think. And then we went for qualifying. We qualified 22nd, I think, which we had a slight oil leak when we was concerned that it might burst because we couldn't actually find where the oil was coming from. It was going on the exhaust pipe. So on left-handers, I'd get a big puff of smoke. And at Pikes, you can't really make a mistake. If the oil, if we had an oil line going, it went onto the tyres, it's quite big consequences there if you do have an off. So we was a bit conservative in qualifying. We found the oil leak. Then we got up for practice for the middle section, and it got cancelled because of snow and ice. So we were in the truck ready to go at sort of 2:45 in the morning, because you have to be on the hill very early for practice, because they give the track back at 8:30 to the park rangers, because it is actually a toll road. So at 9 o'clock it's open to the public, and if you're not in your trailer, car loaded and moving by 8:30, it's around about $1,000 fine for not being moving. So what they do, they start qualifying at sun up. So around about 5 o'clock in the morning, qualifying and practice actually starts. So for the middle, so we went we got up to practice for the middle section, and all our phones went off because you get a text from Pikes Peak saying it's been cancelled because of snow and ice. So that was good. Everybody went back to bed and had a nice sleep. And then we optional Friday test, because everybody had missed it, and it was absolutely piddling it down with rain. It was like blowing gale, and it was quite miserable. So we turned up there in the dark, and we think, I haven't done a lot of running that week, so whatever running, and it might have rained on race day. So I said, we're going to run the car no matter what. So what we did, we got the race tyres from the year before that we ran on, and I managed to get hold of a tyre cutter, and I cut some grooves in some slicks. So we sort of made a bit of an intermediate tyre, because I didn't want to waste a set of full slicks, because we didn't have that many spares. So we thought we'd just run something that will get us, because they won't let you run slicks in the wet. So you have to, show them. And they sort of asked me whether this was the manufacturer's guidance for cutting, which I said yes to, obviously, because that's what they were. They weren't just cutting the garage the night before. So we ran them, and in qualifying, we actually or in practice, we was actually second overall. We were 6 seconds faster than the next unlimited car, which were some of the Porsches and that were running on full wets. And the only car to run faster was Roman Dumas in the electric Ford pickup. So we sort of got quite a lot of attention that day. So I was sort of hoping it might rain on race day. And then we turned up on race day. We had a few issues. We went to load the car the night before and noticed that when I moved the steering, there was something not quite right. And one of the wheel bearings had gone out because there's some funny shims on the camber front suspension that have a habit. I mean, this has been fine for 9 years, this wheel bearing, and it decided to break at Pikes Peak. So took it apart. It runs a Sierra bearing. So I thought, that's all right. My spares, I've got a spare bearing. Strip it all out, get the new ones out, and they give me a Cosworth bearing rather than a 4x4. So it was a different size bearing, so it didn't fit. So I sort of looked at the sorry bearing that was on the floor, and I thought, well, you're going to have to run again from the front. So we cleaned it in some petrol, greased it up, re-shimmed it, put that back in, went to start the car up, and the lift pump packed up. It sucked a load of the foam out of the tank. So we had to strip the fuel pump out, rebuild that, and then we had it up there. And then on race day, a couple of cars had some offs, and then for some reason it just got horrendously hot, and there was 16 cars that failed due to overheating. Now these are cars that have run at Pikes many years, but it put us probably 2 hours behind our run time, so it was even hotter. So we set off the line. Everything was fine. About 6 corners in, thread had pulled out the clutch slave cylinder out of the motor, and we lost the clutch 6 corners in. And then I started looking at some of the temperature gauges, and we had 104 on the water, and the oil temperature stopped reading at 140. But because the water was so hot, it put the fan on, which then drained the battery, because it's not designed to run flat out all the time. And I think we crossed the line with about 10.8 on the voltage. And if it had gone down to below 10 volts, the ECU would have shut off. But we actually finished 9th overall this year. Out of everybody, we did a 10:03, which is slightly slower, but from practice times it looked like we were going to be in the sort of 9:30s to 9:40s. But it's, again, so many people say it have been to Pikes, you're racing the mountain, and the mountain decides. You can have the best prep. I mean, the electric Ford van, if anybody had watched the footage from this year, it actually stopped for about 16, 17 seconds. It shut itself down on its race run. And I dread to think how many millions goes into what they spent there. They must have had 30 mechanics out there, looking after the car. But funny thing was, at FanFest, there was a couple of chaps standing around the car with full performance T-shirts on, and I knew they were obviously with a super van. And I sort of, chatting with them. I said, oh, we've been watching some videos of this last year of it going over the bumps, and they were looking at the suspension. So I took the bonnet off, and they were absolutely mesmerised that it didn't have any anti-roll bars on it. So that's a real credit to Peter and Gary, because without them two, we wouldn't have had what we had to run at Pikes. And it's very underestimated. It's a shame that it never really got taken on. I mean, we did take one of the cars to McLaren years ago when we was at DAX. One of the other chaps there took the car, and a friend of mine works for McLaren, and he rang me up one day, and he said he was going through some paper. He said, do you ever bring a car up? I said, yeah, some years ago. And he see the report on it, but I think they got around the pattern by doing it hydraulically, because they couldn't get the crossbars in because of the luggage areas and that. But basically, the road car McLaren does a very similar thing to the camber comp suspension.
Oh, I didn't know that. There you go.
So but it didn't help that he ran it out of petrol on the test either. He didn't. But yeah, they actually had it up there, and that was at Dunsfold, where the Top Gear track is, which I actually borrowed a customer's car years ago, which was a Busa Turbo, and we actually had the fastest wet lap round the Top Gear track and matched the Stig at the time, which was in the Koenigsegg. We actually equalled his time. You know, so
well, congratulations on that too.
TVR did. TVR were going to build. They actually did start building a camber compensation car, and Peter was in talks with them, and they were going to produce a camber comp car front and back. But yeah, they went. That was just before they folded up. Just Peter's luck, really. But both these hot rods are camber compensation front and back.
yeah, I don't know whether
So even this one that I want to sell, that is, in fact, it's the same dimensions as a Rush, as Duncan's Rush. The actual track and the wheelbase, and all the A-arms and bits, I built them in the same jig, but just made them heavier material. And the chassis, obviously, the chassis is built specifically to the body with the roll cage. It's the perimeter shape of the body. But then this one.
Okay, I keep saying to Gary, with this sort of steering angle, we need to go to Pikes Peak with this and get a hot rod up there.
Oh my!
This one I've done it so I can do a bit of drifting in it later when with me.
Don't believe everything you hear, Jim. He couldn't drift to save his life.
We've also got the same board shocks, more or less, that Dunk's got on his Rush. This one.
Yeah, because I think that was the latest generation of the Rush. Was we actually did a couple? I think there's about 2 or 3 actual cars that exist with the inboard shocks, and then obviously we was going to put it on the rear as well, so we'd have a front and rear engine, or not rear engine, but a camber comp front and rear.
Because these are front and rear, and again the traction when you dump the clutch when you're pulling away is so much better again than like a DD on beam even, because you've got that is totally independent. Whereas on the DD on beam, you still get a bit of shock load if one wheel hits a bump, because it's a common pole with both wheels on it. You still do get a bit of a shock load over to the other wheel, and it will upset it a little bit. Well, the DD on is actually one of the nicest, simplest ways of doing suspension, and that was why it was done on the Rush, just because we could, there's less components and it was more profitable, really. With the DAX product, we always had to be wary of not making something too complicated and too expensive, because we were obviously trying to do it as a business. But yeah, with a lot of these things later on, I just the cost doesn't come into it if you're doing it for yourself. So.
But to credit to Peter and Gary as well. I mean, we ran one of the Rushes at a place called Chomley Pageant of Power, which is a bit like a Goodwood thing, and we'd had mixed weather all weekend. And on my last run, I decided I was going to win the event outright. And unfortunately, it started raining when we went to the line, and we had, I think we were doing just over 100, I think, through a bit of a wooded area, but the rear wheels were touching 140, so we had a fair amount of wheel spin at the time and ended up in the bales. But it went in quite heavy, but the chassis and everything was absolutely spot on. It just bent the A-arms, and literally made a new set of A-arms for it. And because I always used to try and nag Peter to do something a bit more lightweight with some rose joints and a bit racier. But all of my cars that we ever raced was exactly what you could buy from DAX. I mean, I used to run Sierra brakes even on some of mine. Somebody else got in my car and said, "Oh, your brake pedal's a bit high." And I said, "Yes, for when they fade, because I said if you look at the bulkhead, there's dents in the bulkhead where the pedal used to hit the bulkhead when we used to lose the brakes.
Yeah.
But we didn't have anything that was really special on there. Yeah, that was a nice thing, I suppose, with the cars that we used to build at DAX. Nothing was that you couldn't buy as a customer.
Yeah. Also, like the chassis, we'd always do the chassis out of CDS mechanical, so it's really stiff and rigid, and then we'd do all the A-arms out of thicker but softer CDS hydraulic, and that was the idea. The idea was so that if you did smash it into something, the arms would fold up, but the chassis would just be good to bolt, fresh A-arms on and go again straight away. So the Rush was never the lightest 7, but always the most reliable. I bet you won't find someone that's had a crack in the chassis or an A-arm fall off, whereas a lot of the other kit, you do hear some disaster
Horror
stories.
stories.
Yeah, especially when they're using rose
Absolutely
joints, holding their A-arms on. Quite often rose joints will snap, arms will come off and do further damage to the rest of the chassis and everything. But that's never happened with a DAX of any description.
I mean, Gary can probably pay testament to when we put some proper brakes, the Alcons on the brakes, and I ran the slicks on them, and I took in, I think, round Brands Action, we're coming to the hairpin. I mean, the amount of braking force, because you've got the camber comp, you've got the full contact part of the wheel, so you can actually brake as you've got turning on, which normally on a standard car, as you turn, you pull more camber or caster on, so you go to the inside of the wheel and you snatch your brake. Whereas with the camber comp, you've got the full, you can absolutely bury the brake and still have a bit of turning on, which is quite unconcerning if you're not used to it.
Yeah.
We had a few test drivers from magazines drive the car, and because they're very softly sprung, the cars, and with a stiff car, you can go out and you can feel the grip, whether it's understeering or oversteering, straight away. And you can feel like you've got confidence, but the speed you're doing is not great. It just gives you really good feedback. Whereas with the camber comp cars, they're quite soft, and you have to drive to where the grip is. And that's a bit unconcerning for people who are normally used to race cars that are very stiff, and they think, oh, well, that's I'm not sure what's happening. And there was one instance when we was at Anglesey, we was doing something for car-on-car conversion, and I took my car up, but I suffer from rheumatoid arthritis at the time, and my hands and everything weren't very good, so I didn't really want to drive too much. So we took my car in the demo. The chap got in it and he drove it, and I was listening to it and watching. That's not going as fast as it could. So I said, is it all right if I go out and have a go in it and just, see what time I can do? And I actually beat his time. And this chap was Mark Hale, who's an unbelievably good driver in TVR championships and everything else. And the chap ran over to him and he said, oh, he's just beat your time. And me knowing racing drivers, that was enough to G him up to get him back. He said, I think I might need another go in that then. And he went out, and I think he was 2 tenths off the outright lap record in his second go.
There you go.
So, and that was, and he said, if you put a proper seat in it, I'll break the record. So there are differences in them. But yeah, I used to always get ribbed about the car being a bit heavier than all the other 7s, but we were running a lot of power, and we never ripped a diff out. We never broke anything on the Rush.
To win, you got to finish.
Exactly, and that's a bit like Pikes Peak. Everybody's saying 1,000 horsepower, and we turn up with this little car with barely 380 horsepower, and there's other cars there with 1,200-1,400 horsepower.
Yeah,
but it's all a testament to Gary and Peter's, work back in the day.
Yeah. It's amazing. All that time, and the technology is still leading the way.
Yeah.
Well, as I said, I mean, I think my car in '97 or early 2000s, I could, still roll that car out, and it'd be quick. I mean, this one we've got has never really been altered from the day that we actually first built it. Yeah. And it's one time attack and done all sorts of other things, but the last generation was, I did have something quite trick that we'd have liked to have built for a 7, but I just don't know whether I've got the enthusiasm to go through all of that again.
I know. And I remember seeing some interviews, and they'd ask you what you've done to the car, and you tell them that I put fresh air in the tires.
There wasn't any lie.
Yeah.
I mean, it used to irritate people, but I mean, it was, but again, that was probably a bit of tongue in cheek from learning from Gary when we used to go off roading against all the people in the big 4-wheel drive cars and big motorhomes, and I'd be sleeping in an awning on the side of his tent. This is me and Gary 40 years later after we first met, still tinkering, which is balmy, really. I thought Gary was an old bugger when I thought.
Well, you brought me full circle, Duncan, because that's why I wanted to bring the two of you together, because I knew that you had the 40 years of history.
Yeah.
And look at this. You've given us 1 hour, basically an hour and a half of your time. And if I were to be an honest man, I'd probably say your battery on your phone is going to expire any moment.
No, well, we can take some of the good bits out, but it is about that, like I said, it's, kit cars I've not got an affinity to anything. It was just I could only afford the DAX because I worked there. If I'd have built a Caterham and done Pikes Peak with a Caterham, I'd probably be sitting on a very expensive car now. But again, it's proved that, some people just didn't get it. That why don't you just build a new car for Pikes and make it better than? But it wouldn't have had the history that my car had. And one of my favourite films and a bit of inspiration is The Fastest Indian with Burt Munro, which is why we run number 35 on the car. And it's a bit like that, he went across to America with his bike to go and have a go at Bonneville.
Wow.
Which is quite a good feel, that one.
Absolutely amazing stuff. Guys, can I put us all back into the picture here together?
Yep.
There we go. Because I'm afraid your battery is going to go any moment. We've been on for an hour and a half, but guys, this has been absolutely fabulous. And what can I say? Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Duncan, and thank you, Gary, because we've wanted to do this with you for a long time, and I know that you guys are both busy. Yeah. So thank you from 7th Spot for doing this.
It's been a pleasure, and hopefully you just pick some nice bits out and won't bore too many people.
Yeah, no. I think that there's people will be riveted with pretty much everything that's there. You're quite right. I'm going to do some editing, and with your good help, I'm going to throw in some pictures from your past, if you can dig them up on your hard drive, and we'll have something to look at.
Right. No problem.
And okay, I'm going to say adieu, and I'll say thank you again. But please stay online until this totally gets uploaded to the server.